as you start moving into more and more of who you are, ask yourself, what helps my body soften instead of brace? This is part of your healing, and this is part of your unfolding. Hello, and welcome back to Remember Why You're Here, a podcast for seekers and sensitives where you can relax, receive, reconnect to yourself, and remember the most important thing of all, why you're here. I'm Asia Suler, author, teacher, earth intuitive, and in this episode today, we're going to drop into your questions that you all have sent me over the last handful of months. You all come up with the best questions, so I'm really excited to dive into some of these topics in this episode today, including supporting people through end-of-life transitions, what to do when you don't receive any images when you're meditating, how to overcome some of the feelings of like silliness or resistance or worry about coming off as too woo, and so much more. So with that, let's dive into our first question. So this question is from Shauna, and Shauna left me a voice message to say this.
I'm wondering how sensitives can relate to routines or rituals and consistency. As a sensitive and creative in this world, that's something that I've struggled with my whole life, and I would love to hear you speak on that.
So if you are a sensitive and a creative, you likely have a lot of energy inside of yourself that needs to go towards creating something, that needs to go towards, fulfilling that soul impulse inside of you. And exactly as Shauna mentioned in this question, it's really helpful to have rhythms and routines and consistency in what you're doing in order to bring these visions to life. And it's almost like if we don't have those things, then that energy that wants to go into creation can kind of just start to like twirl around and get tangled inside of ourselves. And it can then feel like we're overwhelmed or we're carrying too much. And some of that is because this creative energy needs to go out in the world. So let's talk about it. First thing I'm going to say is that if you want to have rhythms and routines that help you create what you're feeling called to create in this world, it is most helpful to reverse engineer the life you desire. So often we have a dream or a vision of what we want our life to look like, including what we want our creative life to look like. And we often think we need to take, these steps in order to get there. And that's true. But what ends up happening is that we end up being confused about which step to take, what that routine looks like. And the way we do that is not by like finding random puzzle pieces and putting them together. It's by looking at the overall picture of the puzzle that you're completing and then deciding, okay, which pieces do I start with first? So I always tell people, especially when I'm coaching people in my course Business as a Spiritual Journey, to come up with the overall picture first of what do you want your days to feel like? What do you want your life to look like? What, in your ideal world, what would your creative practice look like? How much time would you have? What do you want to create? And then once you have that bigger picture, then you reverse engineer your days and you ask yourself, okay, if that's where I want to go, if this is the bigger picture, what do these small tangible steps look like now? Where do I begin? And with sensitive people in particular, I often find the place that you need to begin is not by adding something into your life, but by removing something. As sensitives, we tend to take on more than we are actually built to handle. It's this strange paradox where we both have a ton of capacity, and so we say yes to things and we take on responsibilities, but then the reality is that our bodies don't thrive with that kind of overwhelm and that kind of overextension of ourselves. And so if we want a really rich, solid, creative practice in our life, we're going to have to let go of something. And oftentimes, this means letting go of something where you're actually self-abandoning, something where you have said yes to it, you've overcommitted, and you're actually like abandoning your creative self or your creative practice in order to do that. And so go through your days and look at what you've committed to, look at what you've said yes to, and then ask yourself, does this help me feel more expanded or more contracted? And that is a sure sign that if something feels like it's kind of contracting you, that might be something for you to review and possibly something for you to let go of. I find with sensitive people that the problem isn't getting in touch with our own selves, actually. The problem is that you've picked up so much energy that it's blocking you from hearing that voice within, or that creative impulse within, or that organizing principle that is going to help you figure out the steps that you need to meet your goal. So even having like a daily practice at the end of the day, or before you sit down in whatever your creative pursuit is, where you cleanse away all the other energies that are not yours from the day, where you envision yourself like a crystal and you give yourself a bath and let it all go, where you call the lights of yourself back to you and all the places that you left them. This is huge for sensitives. We often don't realize that the reason why we're experiencing blockages or static is because we are tracking too many people and taking care of too many things. And when it comes to ritual in particular, I think ritual is an incredible tool for stepping into your creative channel, for living gracefully and fluidly in one's life. So ritual itself can actually be part of a transition piece. And this is something that I find is up in particular for sensitive people, is that we often struggle with transitions. Transitions are innately sensorially overwhelming. You're going from one state of being to another. So if you are someone who finds yourself, for example, you're excited to sit down and work on this piece of writing, but you get to that place and then you immediately go on your phone and you start scrolling and you're like, why am I doing this? I actually am looking forward to this next thing that I'm doing, or I had been looking forward to it and now I'm feeling anxiety and I'm just like sort of doing something mindless on my phone. The reason why you're doing that is because the transition itself is uncomfortable. The transition itself is a bit overwhelming for your body. So rituals can really help with that transition time and that transition piece. So rituals could be as simple as lighting a candle, burning some incense, moving your body for 2 minutes to a song, taking a deep breath with your hand on your heart, whatever signals to you and your body that this transition is underway, and gives you some time to just be present with the fact that it might be a little unsettling for your body to move from one thing to another. And as sensitive people, we go very deeply into whatever the situation is that we are within. So if you're going from, say, parenting to, sitting down to work on your book, that's a big transition. You were just in a whole other world, directly attuning to your child or children, keeping a million things in your brain, tracking all the details of what needs to be cleaned in the house and, the appointments that need to be made. And so give yourself some grace in that transition time, because it might take a moment, but if you're aware of that and you ritualize it, it can be incredibly helpful. And I often find when I feel overloaded and I have an inability to drop into my creative practice, then often what's needed is ritual. And so you will find the rituals that work well for you. In my teachings, I talk about rituals such as channeling work, shamanic journeying, sit spots outside, plant communication. So if any of those feel sparkly or interesting to you, I teach about most of those in most of the classes that I offer. But you will know what's the right ritual transition piece for you. Maybe it's going to be bringing flowers in from outside, or meditating, whatever it is. Ritual often is the answer if you continually reach blocks in creating a schedule or a routine for yourself. And remembering here that it's not about rigidity, it's about relationship. So it's not about picking a schedule and sticking to it no matter what. It's about healing your relationship to time, your relationship to your creative impulse, your relationship to your body and its sensitivity in these steps. And I often find it's really easiest in terms of building routine, consistency, etc., to take small steps at a time, to not give yourself this huge overhaul at once, but to give yourself these small steps so that you can build that relationship with your own creative practice. And then lastly, within all of this, we're building the skill of resiliency, because the reality is that nothing is ever constant. Things are always changing. So whatever routine you have now might not be the routine you have a year from now. Whatever routine you have now, it might get completely dashed next week when something totally unexpected comes up. And so building this tool of resiliency, of having the built-in rituals and gentleness and patience with oneself that help us bounce back instead of feeling completely flattened when something goes off kilter, because that's going to happen. And one thing that really, really helps with this is if you prioritize your creative pursuit, the thing you're most excited about, as the first thing in your day every day. Often what happens is things go haywire as the day goes on. And so if you prioritize the thing that is most important to you first, you have fresh energy, you have fresh possibility. There's way more likelihood that you're not going to get thrown off track with that. This can be really challenging for sensitive people because we often feel like I need to take care of everyone else first before I can take care of me. But the opposite is true. You will have such a wider ability to take care of other people if you take care of the thing that is most important to your heart first. And so I'm not necessarily talking about first thing in the morning. I mean, first thing in the morning, I'm making my daughter breakfast and getting her off to school. Like, I'm certainly not dropping into my creative practice. I am not someone who can wake up very early in the morning. So that's just like not a thing for me. But for me, that looks like, once I do have my space or my time, I sit down, I meditate first thing, drop into some channeling work, and then I write. And for me, that's my creative practice, is writing. So I prioritize that thing that is most important to my heart. And if you even just give yourself 1 hour to focus on that thing, even if it's just once a week, 1 hour once a week, it's going to open up so much possibility for you. So these are all the tools and the things that I keep in mind in terms of creating consistency around routines and rituals so that my creative spark can flourish. I hope that it was helpful for you, because the world really needs what you're here to create as a sensitive person. The world deeply needs what it is that you are passionate about. And so making the space that you need in order to have that creation come through is part of your service to the world. This next great question comes from a listener named Catherine. And though it's specific to something Catherine is experiencing, I think the overarching question is really going to resonate with a lot of you. So let's listen in.
Hi, Asia. I'm wondering if you've had any experience with aphantasia. I have aphantasia, and it's essentially where you cannot see images in your mind's eye. So if somebody asks me to close my eyes and picture an apple, I know what an apple looks like, but I don't see an image of it. This has been frustrating for me as I try to connect more to my psychic gifts, my intuition, and to visualization for co-creation and manifestation. So I would just be curious to hear if you've ever experienced this, how you've maybe guided students or clients through it, and just any wisdom you have around it. Thanks.
Okay, so first thing I want to say is that it is so normal in meditations to not see imagery, whether or not you have aphantasia. It is very, very normal to not be receiving things through a visual channel. And I want to just affirm you that this is not a deficit in imagination, if this is you, that this is not a lacking your intuition. It's just that you receive through different channels. And that's actually a really special thing. So if you have aphantasia, or if you are just not someone who has very strong mental imagery, I want you to know that you are processing information differently than perhaps someone who does have really strong visuals, and that is an asset. And what I encourage you to do is to embrace it. There is a reason why mystics throughout time have gone on journeys to deprive themselves of certain senses, whether that's their sense of sight by going into sensory deprivation, tank, silence, like taking vows of, prudence or simplicity. So there's a reason why mystics forever have done this, and it's because it opens up our other channels of information and communication. It clarifies that channel. And what I have found with people who don't have very strong mental imagery is that their other senses are incredibly strong and there's a lot to receive there. So asking yourself, letting go of trying to have a visual and instead being like, what do I feel? What do I sense? What do I hear? What do I taste? Is there like a somatic knowing in my body? Is it conceptual? Does it seem like I just sort of have an awareness download into my psyche? What emotions am I feeling right now? All of these channels are just as important as visual, if not more. I think there's a level in which these more somatic, conceptual, sensorial, using our other senses, intuitive channels can actually give us clear feedback at times on what it is we're actually receiving. Like looks can be deceiving. And so I think if you are someone who doesn't have visuals, this is actually an invitation for you to recognize the other really clear channels that you do have in place. So that said, in a lot of meditations, people will ask you to see or to visualize something. And I want to encourage you to just make this switch in your brain. Anytime you hear that, anytime somebody says, imagine or see, what you will hear is feel or sense. So if someone says, imagine you're in a meadow, you can just have this ability to flip it in your brain, just right away, have it there and go, feel that you're in a meadow. And notice how that shifts for you. Notice how much more information can come in when you're not trying to reach for a channel in which that's not the way in which the information wants to reach you. So what I have found is that people with aphantasia or difficulty receiving mental images, that they often are actually really good at synthesizing complex information intuitively. We can get very stuck on visuals sometimes. We can get really attached to them. Like I said before, like looks can be deceiving. Like we can sometimes mistake vivid imaginations for an answer to some of our questions. And so what I find is that when we're not overly relying on the visuals, that it actually increases our ability to have this like complex, multi-layered integration of the information we're receiving, because visual is literally only one of our 5 senses, and that's just the 5 senses. We're not even talking about extrasensory abilities. So, think about people who go into sensory deprivation experiences specifically to open up the portal of our awareness. If you are someone who's not receiving mental images, you already have that in place. Actually, the portal of your awareness is really wide. Lean into that. Lean into what is there, because you have this ability to synthesize complex information in the absence of images that creates a greater picture. And I really just want to encourage you to know that your intuition speaks to you in the way your innate channels work. All of us have channels of intuition in which we are receiving information, in which we are having the guidance that we need to live our life. And the way in which it comes in will be completely unique to you. And this is important because it's actually helping you understand yourself. It's helping you understand how you work in this body, the vessel that you're in, and how to receive information in a way that works for you in your life path. So instead of fighting or resisting any of these things, to lean in, to soften in, and to expand out to see what is there. Because I guarantee there is actually so much there that you are receiving and you are experiencing. And the thing that you think limits you is actually the very thing that is opening you up to even greater possibility. Okay, that was such a great question. I know it's going to resonate with so many people. And now I want to move on to a question that I think is also going to resonate with a lot of us. So this question is from another one of our listeners, and it's one that I think we're all carrying at our heart, no matter what our upbringing is. So let's listen to the question now.
I connect so strongly with plants, and I connect so strongly, especially with trees. Now, I am almost 74. I was brought up a certain way. There's always a line I'm afraid to cross. And my family thinks I've lost my mind, but I don't care anymore. I am so ready to do this. I'm not quite sure what steps to take, but I want to go all the way. I mean, I do commune with plants in my own little way, I guess, especially my trees. But I really want to delve into this. So I was just wondering if you could help me.
So this is sort of like the task of our lifetime is to be willing to overcome the parameters that we were given, the conditioning that we were given to embrace our true selves. And for many of us, that looks like embracing the woo. Now, before we even get started with all this, I need to talk about what this word woo actually means, because I certainly grew up hearing this word woo, hearing it thrown around as something that was negative, something you definitely did not want to be. I grew up in the Northeast of the United States where intellectualism, rationalism was very, very prized. So the last thing I ever wanted to be perceived as growing up was woo. And then when I got older, I started having these breakthrough experiences into the spiritual world, into non-ordinary reality, speaking with plants, connecting with my spirit guides and my own wider self. I looked into the etymology of this word woo because it was something I still struggled with. Like I don't want to be seen as woo. And when I looked into it, it totally just melted this part of me that resisted it, because here's the interesting part. This word woo comes from ancient China. And this word woo in ancient China meant female shaman, healer, and herbalist. So really this word woo is a name for a class of women who were incredibly powerful and held power through their ability to be in connection with the non-physical world, with the spirit world, to be in connection with the healing power of the plants and with their own intuition. And so this sacred term for this sacred class of people was taken by the West and twisted into something that was ungrounded, that was shameful, that was out there. And why I say this is because embracing our woo is a reclamation. It's a reclamation of our power as sensitives, as intuitives, as women, if you identify as a woman. So it's actually quite radical work to embrace your woo. It's rewriting history. It's healing the human heart and the human timeline. So I just want to congratulate all of you out there who is working on embracing your woo, because it's literally like healing this great rend in the fabric of reality and in culture, and healing long-term cultural trauma that has divorced ourselves, that made it so that it was unsafe, especially for those socialized as women, made it unsafe for us to trust our intuition, to trust our higher authority, to trust that we do have that connection, we can receive that information, and then we can trust ourselves and our bodies and our inner knowing. And the problem with what came in, especially in the Western world in the interim, is a lot of these religions that arose that were based on fear and control. And I just want to name that, within all of the religions in the world are really beautiful seeds of connection and mysticism and, spiritual unfoldment. But within that, there have been centuries and overlays of domination and control and the use of fear as a way to separate us from our own selves. And so what ends up happening when we walk towards, again, trusting ourselves and this path of our own intuition and this path of spirit or woo, is that fear will come up. And so much of this journey is going to be about companioning yourself and your body as fear or shame or rage arise. And so if you're having any sense of fear or shame come up by moving towards this, what will people think? Is this the right thing to do? All those things, know that that's you purging that from your system. And this is not even something you're just doing for yourself. You're doing it for your whole ancestry. You're doing it for your whole line, for your lineages, past, present, and future. So, to companion your body, to when you're having an intense sensation come up, to stop, breathe into it, give yourself permission to be with it. How many of our ancestors did not have that permission to stop and be with what they were feeling, to recognize what they're feeling, to breathe into it, to tell the part of them that is afraid or does feel shame or is really angry, I see you. I'm here with you. I will never leave you. So to companion your body as these feelings come up, to know it's entirely normal and natural, and not only normal and natural, but it's part of the gift you're giving to this world and to your lineage, because you are healing and releasing this backlog of emotions as you do so. Your body needs to know that it's safe to do this, to walk towards the woo. And safety for humanity, for humans, often is belonging. That's how we survived. And so anything in which you feel like your sense of belonging's in question is going to, of course, bring up these feelings. And so that's why it's really important to connect into communities like this, where people are on the same page. You're not alone. You're together with others. You're orienting in the same direction. And to really ask yourself, as you start moving into more and more of who you are, to ask yourself, what helps my body soften instead of brace? And even if it's a little thing, maybe you're showing up for the first time at a local class. Maybe it's a local intuitive development class, and you're feeling nervous and you're like, oh, I can feel I'm like really nervous right now. What would help you in that moment to soften just 1% more rather than brace 1% more? Maybe you're going to go in with sunglasses on at first, or maybe you're going to take some time to listen to a song before you enter. But to ask your body, to ask yourself that, and know that this is part of your healing and this is part of your unfolding. Shame also thrives when it lives in the closet. So if shame is coming up for you, speaking aloud what it is you're doing, even if it's only to yourself, sharing in forums, taking that step out into the world, that can help dissolve some of that shame which often was used as a tool in these dominant religions and paradigms where control was the key. These systems that had gotten away from the original heart of what that religion or what that spiritual path is like, and was using shame as a tool to control us. So if you're having shame come up, good, because that's also part of you releasing this. And then there's this other aspect too. So maybe with the shame, it feels less like, oh my gosh, everyone is going to forsake me forever and I'm no good. Maybe it's more like, I feel silly. I'm sitting under this tree and closing my eyes and meditating, and I feel so silly. Someone's going to look at me and be like, what is she doing? Anytime this comes up for my students, I always say this is a good thing. Embrace it, because silliness is an important energy. Children learn early on that silliness is when we take something in the way it's supposed to be in our culture and we turn it on its head. Whatever it is, putting pants on your head instead of on your bottoms. And so when we feel silly, it's a sign that we are undoing some of the paradigms we've been handed, that we're questioning them, that we're turning them on its head. And it's a really powerful thing to do. And then lastly, it really helps me when moving more towards who I am, embracing my woo and my power within that, to remember that life is a play, that we are here to play. We are here to experiment, and to ask myself, how do I want to play in this? What feels playful for me? This arena of exploring my woo, it feels playful for me. I want to experiment there. I don't even have to stay with one thing or another. Maybe I won't stay a tarot reader forever, but I want to learn the tarot now. Get into this mindset of play and experimentation and expansion, and this will really, really help. And to know that the very things that feel like they're blocks in your life or negative or preventing you from stepping into this, that also can be a form of play. So I find that in particular, this framework by Caroline Elliott in her book, Existential Kink, can be really helpful, especially if you're someone who grew up in paradigms where there was like a lot of like shaming going on or a lot of like fear-based control. And this framework in Existential Kink is basically kind of shadow work where we look at the things that feel like they're blocking us or limiting us in our life. And we ask ourselves, in what way is my spirit actually delighting in this? In what way is this actually like giving me an opportunity to play? It's a way of embracing what's quote unquote in the shadow, which might be our woo. And these sort of repressed parts of ourselves are the parts that we deem negative, and through embracing them, gaining power again, like really recognizing who we are. And so it's such a tricksterish thing to find like pleasure or power in the very things you dislike or avoid or feel are taboo or are uncomfortable. So if you're feeling like uncomfortable stepping into your woo, know that there's nothing wrong there. And actually, like, can you put that trickster hat on, that sort of like existential kink hat on, and be like, how can I play with this? How, in what way was this like limiting factor in my life? Like, actually something my spirit was playing with, that it was like helping me to explore other aspects of myself. And this will like allow you to, just have a little bit of a lighter heart about the things that feel limiting in your ability to like really step into and relax into your woo. So, for example, maybe you feel shame come up around telling your friends or your family, like what you're up to now. And so the prompt would be like, in what way can I like actually like delight in this shame? Or like, in what way is this shame here to help me? And, maybe the answer is like, wow, like that shame is actually like really making me turn my attention inwards. And when I turn my attention inwards, I'm hearing this voice inside of me that's like, I want to do this, or this voice is like, tell her about your crystal collection, whatever it is. And, if you're interested in this practice, I recommend the book. I recommend looking more into this, but it's again, just this essential quality of like, play with it, see what happens, play with it, play with the blocks, play with the things that limit you, play with the hard stuff that comes up, because that's what we're here to do. We're here to play, and we're here to become more and more of who we innately are. Humans are experimenters. I really think that's part of our role here on this planet, is just to be experimenters. So experiment in this unfolding and know that you're being called to this for a reason. And every single step you take towards who you truly are is an unfolding that touches every corner of the world. It's incredibly important, and it is a service that you were giving to this planet. So thank you for being willing to embrace your woo. This next question came from someone who works with folks in end-of-life care, and it's a question that other people have asked me before. And I'm going to do my best to answer this question from my humble experience and life perspective, and what I've learned from other folks who are death doulas, who provide end-of-life care, who are hospice workers. So the question is this: how do you support people through an end-of-life transition? So this is obviously a huge question, but one that all of us will encounter at some point in our lives, even if it's only supporting our own selves. So here's my humble response to this very big, very important question. First of all, life is a mirror, right? Life is a bookend. Life is a mirror. The beginning of life reflects the end of life as well. And so when we arrive into this world, we are vulnerable. We are on the edge of the unknown. We just came from one place and are transitioning into another, and our bodies need tender care. We know this about infants, but the same is true when we are in our end of life journey. We are also in a place where we need extra TLC, extra care, where our animal body needs extra soothing. And so one thing that I find really helpful, if you are companioning someone through this kind of transition, is to drop out of your head and into your body. And I think about this from when my daughter was born, that so much of helping to ease infants into their transition is actually just keeping your nervous system regulated so that theirs has a safe place to co-regulate with and land. And while when we die, we no longer have the nervous system of an infant, we still are in an incredibly tender, life-changing experience, right? We are in the ultimate life experience. And so any way in which you as a support person or someone visiting with someone who you care about who's in that transition can drop into your body and your regulation will naturally help them through this huge unknown experience that they're moving through. When you hold space for someone in this kind of huge transition, your presence matters more than what you say. And I think we often get in our heads with this of like, I want to say the right thing. You know, I want to give the right advice. I want to have the right spiritual perspective. But the thing is that they are on a huge journey of discovery. This is one of the biggest experiences you will have in your life, death and birth. And they're in the midst of one of the biggest experiences of their soul. And frankly, an experience that their soul has gone through many, many times before. But that said, there's a huge unknown component. There's so much they don't know about this. And so your job is not to give them an entirely new spiritual framework or to say the exact right thing. It is literally just to hold space for them on this incredible journey that they are undertaking in the way that their soul needs to undertake it. We have no say or control in what that journey is going to look like for them and what this last step of life is going to look like for them. And so any way in which you can just normalize whatever is happening for them. Normalize it. There's a million different ways to die. And to also make peace with the unknown inside of yourself. I think often when we're trying to reassure anyone in the midst of a huge life moment, we unconsciously are responding to our own discomfort around the unknown. And so any way in which you can do this work of being with yourself and your emotions, especially if you're close to somebody, so that you can show up and simply be present for them in their journey is a huge gift that you can give them. And to ask yourself, you know, in what ways am I scared of the unknown? And to do that work within yourself in your own time, in your own space, so that when you are showing up and you're being in presence with them, you've developed a relationship where you can trust what's unknown, where you can see that mystery as the beloved, and your own relationship with the unknown will really help someone who is standing on the edge of the greatest unknown. It's really common during this time, from what I've heard from my death doula friends, for a lot of unfinished business to come up. And this is important. It's not something to be rushed through. It's not something to be fixed. It's not something to be solved. This is an essential part of their transition process. And so, you know, rather like than try to reframe their experiences for them, just reflect back to them what it is that they are experiencing or saying. You know, you can always ask, tell me more, or what I'm hearing is this. You know, that reflection is what they need, because again, their soul and their body knows how to do this. They know how to do this process. And so your job is just to support them in that. They are their own spirit guide in this moment, and your job is just to support them, to reflect back to them where they're at, to be a regulated place to land, and to hold space for them. I have found in the few times that I have had the privilege of being with someone who was close to dying, that it makes a really big difference when I am willing to be in the room and in connection with my own higher self. So sometimes it's hard to not be in the emotional body or a sense of like panic or holding on or grasping. But when you can make contact with your own wider or higher self while you're in the room with them, while you're in presence with them, it naturally relaxes the environment. It naturally helps them make a more easeful connection with their own soul and their own wider self. And one thing I found is that when I can be in connection with my higher self, ask for their presence to be with me, ask to be held within their presence, ask for that unconditional love to shine through my eyes or to come as warmth through my hands, that innately opens up this passageway into the other world. And I often find that when I can connect in that way, it's much easier for me to sense the presence of their wider or higher self and sense the presence of their guides as well. And so I encourage you within your own inner self to communicate with their higher selves, to communicate with their guides, even if that's not something in which they're in connection with. It can really help the transition if you're just acknowledging of these other presences in the room, because they are there. They're there to help. And when you are in communication with them, it continues to open those portals of connection and awareness. And then, of course, finally, just to say, the thing that I hear so many hospice workers repeat and often tell family members in particular is being willing to give them permission to let go. So it's a process of getting to the point where you are ready to let go. If you have the experience of a death that gives you that kind of time or space. And then once you within yourself are ready to let go, then you often have to approach the sensation of others not wanting to let you go or others not wanting you to transition. And so giving someone permission to let go can really go a long way. And the more that you trust the unknown, the more that you trust your own wider self, the more that you trust that there is a much bigger journey that we're on as souls, the easier it will be for you to give that implicit permission to just let go. And to know that you are also being given a gift in the presence of someone who is passing. What I find normally is that when there is a passage like this, it creates huge ripples of change in everybody's life who touches them. And so to be at someone's side for this transition is one of the ultimate honors you could ever have in this lifetime. Even as, there's going to be things that come up that are, like really hard, scary, sometimes gruesome. And this is bringing you deeper into the human journey. This is bringing you deeper into the journey of spirit. And just you being willing to soften into your own wider connection and what you know is true and show up with loving, unconditional presence is one of the greatest gifts you could ever give. So that's my answer to this question for now. I will probably have more to say on that as I continue to live my life and have more direct experiences with this. But I feel honored that I was asked this question, and I just want to give a big shout out to all those who are doing this work day in, day out in hospitals and hospice in death doulaship, because the work that you do is just truly incredible. So thank you. Okay, for this next question, we're shifting gears a little bit. So this was a question that a listener sent in, and it was specifically asking about me and my experience in my sabbatical. So let's play that question now.
I've had a lot of curiosity surrounding when you set out on a sabbatical and a healing time, and you have these hopes or goals or visions that you presume you will reach or accomplish. But I would just love if you have time, just share a bit more about how the sabbatical ended up shaking out for you, given that you probably had goals and visions in the front end of what your plans were.
So if you haven't been following along on the journey, I took a sabbatical last year to work on my next book. And this book is about the deep ancestors. It's about our Paleolithic ancestors, how they thought, how they experienced the world, and how the consciousness that they inhabited still lives inside of us today and is actually here to guide us into our next phase, our next evolution as human beings. So it's something I'm so dorkily excited about. I love researching this time period, this history, and loved taking the sabbatical. And, I think I actually had a pretty good head on my shoulders for the sabbatical. I set the bar really low in my expectations of what I was going to get done. My goals during the sabbatical was to collate the last 5 years of research that I had done, all the notes I had taken, all the books I had read, to organize it, collate it into a cohesive outline, and to get the introductory chapter written. Those are my goals, and I hit those goals, so I felt pretty good about that. I did learn some things about myself on the sabbatical. I learned that I need a lot more space and time and slowness than I realized. A lot more. It's amazing how even taking those months off from working, the days did seem to fill up with a lot, and that I often am very good at getting a lot done in short periods of time, but that when it comes to this big creative work and this big synthesis and channeling work, that I do need more space and time. So I feel like the sabbatical, it really showed me what I actually need, the ingredients that I need to create these bigger works that I dream of in my life. And it helped me recognize the places in which I was overriding my capacity, in which I was taking on too much. And it really has helped me reorganize my general expectations of myself in my life, to create more space to do what I need to do, to let go of what I need to let go of, and in order to have more space to drop in the way that I was able to on the sabbatical. It gave me more of a taste of what life looks like when you're living at the pace that your nervous system really needs. And I came back with a sort of renewed enthusiasm for creating that kind of life for myself, for taking the lessons that I learned in my sabbatical and bringing it into my day-to-day life, which I think is the purpose of sabbatical. I took 5 months off last year, and those 5 months, they did radically transform how I want to live all the coming months in my life. I realized that I want to take more time off in general. That's something that if I prioritize that, I will likely make huge leaps in the projects and the things I want to see unfold. And it will support me in taking that time off, because it moves the dial ahead so much so in my life. So I'm still learning from the sabbatical as I am, just softening back into work now. But it definitely reorganized the way I work. It reorganized what my nervous system really is willing to put up with at this point too. Now that I've seen what it's like to have that kind of space, I'm yeah, I need to build this in to my life more. And so I'm so grateful for that experience. I will continue to use it as a touchstone, and I'm excited for the next one, because you bet your buttons, I'm going to take another sabbatical, because now I know that I can, and I know that it actually ends up giving so much to my life to take that time. So with that, I thought it would be great to drop into our next question, which was sent in by another listener named Elizabeth. And this question is about some of the research that I was doing into the deep ancestors. So the question is, do we know anything about how our deep ancestors approached love, partnership, parenting, and family structure? And if emerging research offers insight we could learn from today? So, yes, there is research on this. The archaeological record can only show us so much, right? So a lot of what people are talking about now within these topics is a combination of archaeological research, advances in DNA testing, but also what we know about our own neurobiology. If we just study our own neurobiology, we can understand how we were built and what we were built for. We are no different than our deep ancestors. And it's part of why we struggle and have issues in the modern world right now, because we weren't built for the kind of lives that we lead now. We were built for slower lives, more expansive lives. We were built to have more downtime, more leisure. We were built for close community bonds, for deep support and relational trust. We were built to be walking through the world, to have deep relationships with landscapes. So we can actually know more about our ancestors through looking at our own current neurobiology. So before I dive into what some of the more current research is saying, I just want to say that human beings are diverse, and we've been diverse from the start. There is no one way to live as a human. I'm going to venture a guess that there have been many different kinds of cultural systems, family systems, parenting systems in the past, and that there's no one right way, and that this diversity is part of what marks humans as a species, that we are a diverse species, that we tend to try out and experiment with different ways of living. So that all said, place everything I'm going to say now into that context of understanding that there are many diverse ways to live like a whole human life. So we know, ground basis, we know that we were evolved to have pair bonds. Now, pair bonds is not the same thing as monogamy. Pair bonds, it can look like a lot of different things, but what pair bonds basically are where we're bonding with someone else in a way that we are, sharing territory, sharing responsibilities. And, these pair bonds, they exist between animals outside of humans. This is not just a human thing. This is a mammalian thing and beyond even mammalian thing, but that these pair bonds are beyond sexual connection, and they like outlast a single, mating season, for example. So, our ability to fall in love is a marker of this propensity for pair bonds, that we are meant to like have close connections with other humans in which we share responsibilities. Now, a lot of what is said in the research is that the reason why we have these pair bonds, these important pair bonds, is that our infants are incredibly labor intensive. Human infants are just like unbelievably energetically expensive when you look at the wide world of all the creatures on this planet. And so this added pressure of caring for like infants that need children that need a lot of care, long-term, multi-year care, is that this original bond basically between a mother and an infant was kind of like co-opted and turned into, using the same like hormone and chemical structures, turned into bonds that then we form with other adults. And that these bonds were important to help mothers care for their children. Now, there's not conclusive evidence that these pair bonds was meant to be a mother and a biological father. There is evidence that their biological fathers caring for their biological children in the archaeological record, but I'm going to venture a guess that these pair bonds looked like a lot of different things. And even though we do have this propensity towards pair bonds are important to us in this wider context, we evolved to rely on our communities. Even just a pair bond is not going to cut it in terms of raising a child. Anyone who is in a relationship and has a child knows this. The two of you can't do it all. It's impossible. So we evolved as humans to rely on our whole community, that we have our pair bond within the community that is, ideally helping us in a deep way with our parental responsibilities. But then we also have the community, and we rely heavily on alloparents in the community. Alloparents is this term for other people, aunties, uncles, cousins, older kids, other people within our bonds, within our social structures who are helping us to raise our children. And so these alloparents are absolutely essential for raising of children. And I imagine that in the past, family structures, the way we think of them now, they certainly weren't nuclear, and they weren't just related to relational bonds as well, because the bands that we lived in, we know that yes, there were ties of, genetic similarity or familiarity, but there was also people who weren't part of that genetic pool who were also part of that band. Otherwise, the band wouldn't have survived. We need a diversity of genetic information and materials. So people were choosing families. People were joining bands, choosing that family, becoming a part of them. And so your larger unit, the family that was helping to take care of your children, was not necessarily all your immediate family. And so what we're seeing here is family structures that rely on people not necessarily even related to you. We know that grandmothers were incredibly important in the raising of children. That's a whole thing called the grandmother hypothesis that we can go into another time. And we see that though pair bonds are important, we also know through like other research and looking at our closest primate relatives that there is evidence that some of our sexual characteristics that we carry point to us being more similar to bonobos than some of our other primate cousins in that we use sex as a tool for bonding and affiliation and creating intimacy. And so with that, if we look up bonobos, that sex is, not necessarily relegated to one person, that it's a way in which you create social bonds, you create social structures. And so I imagine, given all this information, that we had units of people taking care of our children in a way where we likely were not hyper-focused on possibly only, one sexual partner, where we also were likely, I can say guaranteed, not hyper-focused on just the parents raising one child. And so we're returning here to this idea that like chosen family is an important part of the human experience, that having shared parental responsibilities, an essential part of the human experience. We were not meant to do it alone. We were meant to do it in these wider structures. And there's even one hypothesis that our, at times, propensity towards socially monogamous pair bonding actually evolved from same-sex friendships. So this is really interesting. In chimpanzees do not mate for life with their whoever it is that they're having children with, their sexual mates, but they do pair bond with same-sex chimps. They do have same-sex pair bonds that can last a lifetime. And so this is just one hypothesis, but I love that concept that same-sex relationships and pair bonds, lifelong pair bonds, are what gave rise to what we see as sort of the standard of the like heterosexual pair bond relationship. But I think, there's so much information there about this. I think what I would say at the end of the day is that the way that we're parenting and the way that we're doing relationships right now just doesn't really work. And we know this. Like, we see this, right? We see that like just the two people taking care of the one child doesn't work. If we were meant to be solely, across the board, all of us, monogamous, just with one person for the rest of our life, then it wouldn't be so hard to do that. And it is really hard, right? Like, most people don't do that or have that. And so this is my hot take based on the research. But really, I think humans are we're creative. There's a lot of different ways in which we've learned how to make diverse family units and structures, in which I think there's been times where we've been much freer with, the way in which we relate to one another, and the way in which we like explore and sanctify our own sexuality. And so this is just a little taste, but I wanted to say that if you are interested in this, if this is like piquing your interest, there's a couple places I want to point you to. So the first place I want to mention is the Instagram account and Substack account called Ancestral Habits. I love this account. I love everything that the woman behind this is doing. She's collating so much of the research from the last 20 years, but also new stuff that's coming out now. And she has a searchable database on her website for all her Instagram posts. So definitely check out Ancestral Habits if you're interested in this. You can even check out the section that she has on parenting and relationships. I also recommend the books Sex at Dawn if you're interested in more of like the sexuality and like pair bond aspects of this. And also Hunt, Gather, and Parent, another book, as well as the book Mothers and Others. So those are two books that are looking more specifically about parenting and parenting structures, and asking this question of how are we supposed to be parenting as human beings? Okay, so this brings me to the final question that I'm going to cover today in this Q&A podcast. And this is one that a lot of you have sent in to me, and I'm going to answer it to the best of my ability. I wish I had like 10 hours or 10 days to answer this, but many of you have been noticing that I've been recording in front of my bookshelves. And everyone is asking me, like, tell us about your books. What's on your bookshelf? What have been the most influential books on your path? So I'm here to answer some of your bookshelf curiosity. And I decided to frame it as, what were like the turning point books in my life? I chose 6 turning point books. I'm going to talk about each one briefly, but I want to mention that if you want a more comprehensive book list, if you're interested in what is on my shelves, I actually created a web page where I list each category that I have in my library and my favorite books within that category. So if you're interested in checking that out, you can head on over to asiasuler.com/library books. And that will give you, I guess it's a reading list. And I made it a website so that I could update it because I'm always reading new things and always wanting to add them. So, okay, let's drop in. So the first book I want to talk about is this book, The Encyclopedia of Bach Flower Therapy, and that's by Mechtil Schaefer. And so this book was the first book I ever read about flower essences, about energetic or vibrational medicine. At the time, I was living in New York City. I had a job taking care of office plants. And my mom actually gave me this book. One of her clients, she has had a psychotherapy practice. One of her clients gave her the book and she was like, I think Asia would be into this. And I started reading it and just started crying. Just cried like the whole first several chapters. And I call those kind of tears truth cries. And it was the first time I had ever heard about just someone talking about plants as beings that help us on the psycho-emotional level. It was the first time that I heard someone referring to medicine as that which helps unblock us so that we can inhabit like the wider blueprint or destiny of our life, our wider selves. And so I'm choosing this book because it opened up my awareness. And there's a lot of books out there now about connecting with plants on a spiritual level, but I still love this book. I love the way the introduction to flower essences is written. I love the way it's described, and it's a really easy entry point because Bach flower remedies are available everywhere. And I started using the book as like a little bit of like an oracle. Like I would just open to a page, and whatever page I opened to, I'd be like, okay, that's the essence that I need. And of course, I went on to found One Willow Apothecaries, where I sold flower essences and I shared them with people around the world. So this was just the beginning of so much. So I have to mention this book because it was so important to me. The next book I have is Awakening to the Spirit World, and this book is by Henk Wesselman and Sandra Ingerman. This book came in for me, it was probably maybe, 3 or 4 years after I read the Flower Essence book, and I had been having a series of dreams where I was having experiences in non-ordinary reality and was being shown how to do different things, like how to travel through time and space and transform into an animal, and these wild series of dreams. And at the end of it, the person who had been teaching me in these dreams said, this is shamanism and we want you to learn it. And I had been in college, I had been an anthropology major for a while. And then at the last minute, I ended up switching to being an English major and an anthropology minor. But so from my perspective, shamanism was anthropologically situated in my brain. And, it was something that was sort of like a catch-all term for, very specific cultural practices held by indigenous people. And so when I had these series of dreams, I was like, what does this mean? Like, what are you asking of me? And I remember, like, I don't even know if Google was around then. Maybe it was. It's just very new. I don't think I asked Jeeves it, but I asked someone it. And anyways, this was the book that came up, Awakening to the Spirit World. And I love the subtitle, The Shamanic Path of Direct Revelation, because really what this book talks about is this word shamanic, which is, I consider it kind of like a seed word that's helping all of us to remember something that is cross-cultural and it is an innate part of the human psyche. And it is really opening this pathway to remember that you have the ability to communicate with the unseen world, with the spirit world, and bring back direct revelation for yourself as well as for your community. So this is where I first learned how to undertake a shamanic journey. And this book really opened me up to this next phase of my unfolding and my connection to what I call the spirit world. It really informed my work from here on out. Shamanic journeying was a huge part of my journey of healing from Lyme disease. And so, this book was kind of the thing that started it all. At some point I went and studied with Sandra Ingerman as well. And yeah, I still absolutely adore her work in particular. And I just still have such cozy feelings when I think about this book. And then a few years later, I stumbled across the book Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Weiss. And so this book is a recounting of Brian Weiss, who was a psychotherapist who was working with hypnosis and his clients and had this breakthrough experience where this one client started recounting other lifetimes. And I had always believed in other lives, in reincarnation, but there was something about reading this book where it just opened up my portal of awareness into my own past lifetimes, into the space between lifetimes. It started a whole new chapter in my life. I ended up going to study with Brian Weiss to learn past life regression therapy, which I used mostly in my own life and, with my friends. It never became like a hugely incorporated part of my own practice or offerings in the world. But I loved that experience. And it's just one of those books where, here's the thing, my favorite books are books that help me remember. They're not books that are like necessarily even telling me something new. It's just helping me remember what I already knew. And so it felt like this huge soul remembering for me when I read his book. And then I went on to read all his other books. And then I got into Michael Newton, who wrote Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls, someone else who's doing hypnosis, but instead is focusing on life between life. Very cool if you're interested in that. So I just feel like these books always made me really feel connected to my eternal soul. And that's kind of an important way to feel in this life. So I'm really grateful to this book for opening that door in that way. And I went on to teach other people how to access their past lives. In my long-term program, Winter Intuition School, I teach about past lives and past life connection. And when we had retreats in person, I would bring everyone through a regression, which was always really interesting. And then I gave folks scripts to go work with one another. And I was just always amazed what happened, especially with folks who've maybe never even done this before or guided someone before, what would come up and what they could access. So knowing that this is accessible to all of us and that your journey as a soul throughout all your lifetimes, it just has so much wisdom to impart, and there's so many ways in which you can be supported by that. So now, this is making me want to reread it again. The next book I chose to talk about was this book, Witches and Pagans by Max Dashu. So this book is a researched reclamation of pre-Christian spiritual practices. It is rewriting women's history, indigenous European history. There was so much in here that, as someone who is an earth-based practitioner, who is really working on reclaiming my ancestral traditions and the sort of suppressed lineages of wisdom that exist, there was so much in here that just gave me just so much perspective, so much power, and so many aha moments. There's moments in here that are also hard to read because you are reading about, just the reality of how much of the ancestral wisdom, especially ancestral wisdom held by women in Europe, was dominated, punished, controlled, suppressed. And at the same time, in an overarching way, I felt really empowered reading this because it made me realize that what I had been innately connecting to and realizing, the intuitive guidance I was receiving, that it wasn't just coming from nowhere, that actually this is how my ancestors lived, this is how my ancestors practiced, and that as someone of European descent, I do have connection to a long line of healers and wisdom keepers, that there is, wisdom, indigenous wisdom inherent in the deep roots of Europe that is here to hold you if you are someone who is of European descent. So highly encourage this book if any of that is interesting to you. And I certainly know that a lot of this information in this book ended up getting incorporated into my teachings, especially in the overarching class that I have called the Pussy Portal, where I talk about vaginal healing and reclamation, and basically how this whole root of our body is a incredibly profound pathway into spiritual reclamation and connection with our own wider selves. So definitely recommend this book if you're interested. The next book I want to talk about is Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. I actually don't have a copy of the book with me right now because I lent it out because I love this book so much. And what I love about this book, so this was a foundational text in somatic therapy. We had a copy of this book on our shelf growing up with it. My mother is an EMDR therapist. But what I love about this book in comparison to other books that talk about somatic healing and trauma resolution is that this book feels healing unto itself to read. I'm not going to name names, but other books I've read about trauma healing feel re-traumatizing to me. I have not been able to get through them, but Waking the Tiger, it felt like it was actually healing for me to read. It helped me understand healing on a somatic level. It gave me a framework to work through hard things in my life. And as a sensitive person, it gave me a conduit to get back into my body in this lifetime. And I think that's a huge task, a huge goal for other sensitive people, is just to get back into our bodies, to feel like our bodies are safe spaces again. And so much of Peter Levine's work and the somatic work that I've done in the interim years has been folded into so much of what I do, including the Sensitive series, a one-off series that I taught and that is still available on my website now, a series specifically to help sensitive people understand their gifts, as well as my longer live program, Earth Angel School. So it feels like reading that book was the beginning of a new chapter, a new phase of integrating a lot of the spiritual connections and knowledge that had opened up for me into my body, into my lived experience, and into my teachings. The last book I want to mention is The Seven Daughters of Eve by Brian Sykes. And this was one of the first books I read that got me interested in my deep ancestry and the deep past. This book is an exploration of mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA. And basically, we have this DNA that we carry within us that is carried by our mother's line, that once we were able to isolate and find it, it can help us trace our ancestral lineage back in time. So he talks about the 7 different lineages that we know and are aware of and can trace. And he really brings those lineages alive. So if you've ever done a DNA test, you can find out what your group is, which daughter you are descended from, or which mother you are descended from. And then you can read about, where they lived, what time period they lived in. It also talks a little bit about sort of the adventure of figuring out this science. And I just loved it. The book came alive for me. And I read this, I think it was before I did my pilgrimage trip to England, where my mother's people are from, and ended up having a really big experience that was the seed for this book I'm writing now, this book about the deep ancestors. So really, this book began that journey in some ways. And so if you're interested in deep time ancestry, then I highly recommend this read. And there are so many more. There are so many more books. I could have just talked about books for the next however many hours. So I decided to put them all up on my website, or at least all my favorites in each category up on the website. So if you are interested in books about soul studies, plant medicine, sexuality, energy healing, indigenous philosophy, poetry, depth psychology, I have all of those categories and all my favorite books organized underneath them on the website. Just go to asiasuler.com/library books and you can peruse the shelves. So now I'd love to hear from you. What were your turning point books? What were the books that just came in and resonated with you on this level that it opened up this whole new part of your pathway? I'd be so curious to hear if you want to share in the comments, or if you want to head over to my website, asiasuler.com/remember, you can leave me a voice message. So as you've heard, a lot of these questions today came from listeners leaving me voice messages. So if you have a question for a podcast in the future, go ahead and leave me that question there, and I would love to hear it. So I hope that in the things that I said today, you found your own answers, that it sparked within you this own inner knowing, this connection to your own inner self and to the stream of guidance that is always here for you. And I hope that in whatever guidance you received within yourself and whatever connections you have made within yourself today, that it helps you remember that most important thing of all, why you're here.